I'm Miriam Alcott, 49 years old, and I joined the Marine Corps at 18, while my own family laughed and gave it a month. For 30 years, I served, deployed, and quietly sent money home. And the whole time, my older brother told everyone I had a government desk job that never amounted to much. But when a guard at the Pentagon tore up my visitor pass in front of my mother, and then a 3-star general stopped cold in the corridor, I finally stopped shrinking so other people could stay comfortable. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe. In our house, achievement had a smell, and it always came from my brother's side of the table. Russell was 4 years older than me, and by the time I was old enough to notice these things, the shape of the family was already set. He was the one with the future. I was the one they didn't worry about, which sounds like a compliment until you understand it meant they didn't think about me much at all. We grew up in a small brick house outside of Dayton, Ohio, the kind of street where everyone knew whose kid had made honor roll and whose kid had wrecked the family car. Russell made honor roll. Russell was captain of things. When the neighbors came over, my father would call him into the living room to shake hands, and Russell would stand there in that easy way he had, already good at being admired. I would be in the kitchen with my mother, drying dishes, and no one would call for me, and I learned very early that this was simply how it went. My mother, Eleanor, was not a cruel woman. I want to be clear about that because the story's easy to tell as if she were, and she wasn't. She was a woman who wanted peace more than she wanted anything, and peace in our house meant agreeing with whoever spoke the loudest. That was almost always my father, and after my father, it was Russell. She kept the peace the way some people keep a garden, constantly, quietly, at the cost of her own back. I understood her better later than I did then. When you are a child, you only feel the absence of someone taking your side. You do not yet have the grace to see why. There is a memory I keep from when I was maybe 11. The furnace had gone out in the middle of a January cold snap, and my father was on the phone trying to get a repairman who wouldn't come until Monday, and my mother was worried about the pipes, and Russell was at a friend's house being brilliant somewhere. And I went down into the basement by myself with a flashlight and my father's toolbox, and I read the little diagram taped to the inside of the furnace panel, and I figured out that a switch had tripped and a part had come loose, and I fixed it. The furnace kicked back on. I came upstairs filthy and told my father the heat was back, and he looked at me for a second with something I did not have a name for then. Something like surprise that had a door in it, a door that might have opened. And then the phone rang, and it was Russell asking to be picked up, and my father said, "Good girl," absently, already reaching for his keys, and the door closed, and that was that. I have thought about that flashlight 100 times since. I think a part of me has been down in that basement my whole life, fixing the thing nobody asked me to fix, waiting for someone to come all the way through the door. I was the quiet one. I read a great deal. I liked to fix things, the lawnmower, the screen door, the old radio in the garage, and I liked the feeling of a problem that stayed solved once you solved it. Nobody in my family knew what to do with that. Russell's ambitions made sense to them, sales, business, a corner office someday. Mine didn't translate, so when I came home at 18 in the spring of 1994 and told them I had gone down to the recruiter and signed papers to join the United States Marine Corps, the reaction was not anger. It was something worse. It was amusement. Russell laughed. He was 21 then, home from his second year of college, and he laughed the way you laugh at a child who says she is going to be an astronaut. "You're going to be a Marine," he said, drawing the word out. "Okay, sure. That'll last about a month." My mother's first question was not about me at all. It was what she would tell the Hendersons next door. My father said very little, which was its own verdict. I did not last a month. I lasted, in the end, a very long time. But that first laugh set something in me that I carried for years, a decision that I would not need them to understand what I did in order to keep doing it. It was a useful decision, and also a lonely one, and I have spent a good part of my life learning the difference between the two. Boot camp did not break me the way Russell predicted. It found things in me that Dayton never had the language for. I was good at staying calm when other people came apart. I was good at carrying weight, the literal kind and the other kind. I was good at the thing they never taught in school, which was making a decision with incomplete information while everyone waited on you to do it. I came out of Paris Island a different person, And when I came home on leave in my uniform, thinner and straighter and quieter, Russell looked at me for a second like he didn't recognize me, and then he made a joke, and the family laughed, and we were back where we started. The years went on the way years do. Russell built a sales career, and he was genuinely good at it. I will give him that. He could walk into a room and make everyone feel they had known him for a decade. He married, bought a house with a lawn he was proud of, had 2 children he loved. And I deployed, and came home, and deployed again, and the distance between what my life actually was and what my family believed it to be grew wider every single year, and neither of us did much to close it. There was a stretch in the late 1990s when my father got sick, and the medical bills came in the way they do, faster than anyone was ready for. I was a young officer by then, not making much, but I sent money home every month, quietly, through my mother, and I asked her not to make it a thing. Russell was building his business and was, as he put it, stretched a little thin. I never once heard him say he had sent anything. I don't say that to keep a ledger. I say it because it is the truth, and the truth matters in a story like this one. When my father passed, it was my money that had helped cover the last of it, and at the funeral Russell gave the eulogy, and he was wonderful, and everyone told him so. I remember standing at a payphone on base one night, years into all of this, after a call where Russell had reduced my entire career to a single sentence. "It's a government job, Miriam," he had said, warm and certain, the way he was certain about everything. "A government job with a gun. Don't make it sound like more than it is." And I had let it go, again, because arguing felt like begging, and I had promised myself a long time ago that I would never beg them to see me. I hung up the phone. I stood there in the dark with the cicadas going, and I told myself what I always told myself. It does not matter if they understand. The work is the work whether or not they clap. I believe that. I still believe most of it. But there is a cost to a thing you tell yourself so you can keep walking, and I would not learn the size of that cost until many years later, in a marble corridor in Washington, on the day my own brother watched a 3-star general apologize to me. The thing about a family story is that once it hardens, it is almost impossible to break, no matter what actually happens. Ours hardened around the idea that Russell was the success, and I was the odd one who had wandered off into something no one could quite picture. And you would think that the largest day of my life would have been enough to crack it. It wasn't. If anything, it made the story stronger because they simply folded the day into it. In 2005, I was a captain, 29 years old, commanding a rifle company. I am not going to walk you through that day, the way it happened, because it is not the kind of thing I tell at length, and because this is not a story about that day. It is a story about everything that came after it. What you need to know is that a compound came down under fire with my Marines inside it. And I went back in, and I brought people out, and by the time it was over, there were 9 of them alive who would not have been. That is the short version. It is the only version I have ever been comfortable saying out loud. 2 years later, in 2007, I stood in the East Room of the White House, and the President of the United States put the Medal of Honor around my neck. My mother was there. Russell was there. And I want to tell you that in that room, watching the highest honor this country gives being placed on their daughter and their sister, something in them shifted. But that is not what happened. What happened is that they were proud in the moment, genuinely, and then they went home and slowly turned it into an anecdote. I heard Russell tell it once, at a cousin's wedding, a year or so after. He had a drink in his hand and a circle of relatives around him, and he was telling them about my medal. Except in his telling, it had become a kind of accident. "Right place, right time," he said, doing that easy shrug. "She'll tell you herself. Anybody would have done it." I had never told anyone that. Anybody would not have done it. That is the entire point of the medal, that most people, in that moment, do not. But Russell needed the story to be small enough to fit next to his own, and so he made it small, and the relatives nodded, and I stood at the edge of the circle, holding a paper plate, and said nothing. I understand, looking back, why he needed it small. Russell had built his whole self around being the impressive one, and my life, once you actually looked at it, did not fit next to his in the way he needed it to. It was not that he was a monster. He was a man who had staked everything on being the tallest person in every family photograph. And a sister with a Medal of Honor is not something you can stand next to and stay the tallest. So he did the only thing that let him keep his balance. He made me shorter, I do not think he even knew he was doing it. That is the strange mercy and the strange cruelty of it both. That the people who diminish you are very often not plotting anything. They are just protecting a picture of themselves, and you happen to be standing in the frame. That was the pattern for years. At holidays, he would introduce me as, "My sister, she's in the military," and then move the conversation along before anyone could ask a follow-up question. There was a Thanksgiving, I remember, maybe 2014, where a man Russell worked with was a guest, a veteran himself, Army, and he clocked something about me across the table, the way old soldiers can. He started asking me real questions, good ones, about where I had served and what I had done, and I could see him beginning to understand that the woman across from him was not who the host had implied. And Russell, sensing the table tilting toward me, stood up and announced he was carving the turkey and needed everyone's attention, and the moment broke, and the veteran gave me a small look afterward, a look that said, "I know," and I never saw him again. Small things. They were always small things. That is what makes them so hard to explain to anyone who wasn't there. No single one of them was worth making a scene over, and that was exactly how 30 years of them added up to a story about me that I had somehow agreed to by staying quiet. Once at a dinner, my nephew, who was maybe 10, asked me what I did, and before I could answer, Russell answered for me. He said I worked in an office on a base and did something with logistics. It was not close to true. I was, at that point, a lieutenant colonel who had commanded at levels most people never see. But I looked at my nephew's open, curious face, and I looked at my brother's certain one, and I decided that a family dinner was not the place to correct the record, and I let it stand. I let it stand so many times that I lost count. There was one dinner, though, around 2018, that I did not lose count of, because it was the one that a friend of mine refused to let me forget. Russell corrected me in front of guests about my own deployment. He told the table, confidently, that I had been somewhere I had never been, doing something I had never done, and when I gently said, "That's not quite right, Russell," he smiled and said, "I think I'd remember, Miriam," and the table chuckled, and I let it go. I told Priya about it later. Sergeant Major Priya Nadell had been my friend for the better part of 20 years, since we were both young and hungry and underestimated, and she is the one person on this earth who has never once let me hide behind my own composure. She listened to the whole thing on the phone, quiet, and then she said the thing I have never been able to unhear. "You run toward gunfire, Miriam," she said. "You have literally run toward gunfire, but you won't correct your brother at a dinner table." She let that sit. "You want to think about why that is." I did not have an answer for her. I still am not sure I have a clean one. The closest I can get is that the gunfire was simple, and the dinner table was not. On the battlefield, I knew exactly who I was. At my mother's table, I became, somehow, 18 again, the odd one, the one they didn't worry about, and it was easier to disappear into that old shape than to fight my way out of it in front of people passing the potatoes. So when the letter came, the spring of this year, telling me that my portrait was going to be added to the Hall of Heroes at the Pentagon, I sat with it for a long time before I did anything. The Hall of Heroes holds the names and faces of Medal of Honor recipients. To have your portrait placed there is a quiet, permanent thing. And I found myself, at 49 years old, wanting my mother to see it. Wanting Russell to see it. Not to gloat. I want you to believe me about that, because it is important. I did not want to win. I wanted, just once, to stop translating myself, and to let a building I did not build say the thing I had never been able to say at a dinner table. I picked up the phone and I invited them. I remember sealing that decision the way you seal an envelope, pressing it flat, aware that I was handing my brother one more chance to see me clearly, and aware, somewhere underneath, that I had handed him 100 chances before, and he had declined everyone. The Pentagon on a weekday morning is a river of people. I had forgotten that, or maybe I had never known it, because in all my years I had come and gone through the doors that active duty officers use with a badge that opens things, and I had never once stood in the visitor's line as a guest. But this trip was different. I had flown in from my post the night before. My uniform, my dress blues with the medal, was pressed and waiting at the hotel, because the unveiling itself was a formal event later that morning, and there was a whole choreography to it. A place I was meant to change, a schedule, So on that first walk-in, I was simply a woman in her late 40s in a good civilian blazer and slacks, holding a printout with her elderly mother on one arm and her brother a step behind. Russell narrated the building like a tour guide who had never been there. He does that, fills silence with confidence, and I usually find it charming, and that morning I found it charming too, mostly. My mother was nervous in the way she gets in unfamiliar places, her hand tight on my forearm, asking me twice if we were in the right line. "We're in the right line, Mom," I told her. "I promise." Russell said something about how big the place was, how much of our tax money it must take to run, and gave me a look, the old look, the one that said, "Isn't this all a bit much for what you people actually do?" I let it go. I was good at letting it go. I had 30 years of practice. We reached the visitor desk. There was a young officer behind it, and I want to be fair to him even now, so I will tell you what I saw. His name, I would learn, was Wade Coyle, and he was with the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, and he was somewhere in his mid-30s, and he had the particular energy of a man who has a small amount of authority and has decided it is a large amount. There was a line behind us. He had an audience. Some people are worse with an audience, and he was one of them. He took my printout and my identification, and he looked at them, and then he looked at me, and I watched something in his face decide to make this difficult. The name on the visitor manifest had been entered with a letter wrong. Alcott spelled with one letter off from the way it read on my ID. It was a clerical thing, the kind of thing that gets waved through 100 times a day with a shrug and a correction. He did not shrug. "This isn't valid," he said. He said it loudly enough for the line to hear. "The name doesn't match. You need to leave." I kept my voice level. I have spent a lifetime keeping my voice level in rooms far worse than that one. "My name is on the list," I said. "There's a spelling error in your system. If you check it against the invitation, you'll see the confirmation number matches. I'm a guest of the event upstairs." He did not check anything. I think honestly that checking would have required him to be wrong in front of the line, and he had already decided he would rather be certain. He looked at my civilian clothes, and he looked at my mother clutching my arm, and he made a judgment about who we were, and the judgment was that we were nobody worth the trouble. And then he did the thing I still, to this day, find hard to describe, without my chest going tight, not from anger, but from how small it was. He took my visitor pass, the printout with my name on it, and he tore it in half. He did it slowly so I would see, and he let the two pieces fall onto the counter between us. "Security will walk you out," he said. Behind me, quietly, I heard my brother. He leaned toward my mother, and he said, in that low voice men use when they think they are being kind, "This is exactly what I mean. This is exactly what it's like with her." And my mother said nothing, and I felt her hand loosen on my arm, and I understood that in that moment, in front of that desk, my family's entire story of me had just been confirmed by a stranger with a lanyard. I was the odd one. I was the trouble. I did not belong in the building. I looked down at the two halves of the pass on the counter. I did not raise my voice. I did not reach for my wallet, where there was, in fact, a card that would have ended the whole thing in 3 seconds, because some stubborn, tired part of me did not want to have to prove I was a person in order to be treated like one. I just stood there, and I felt 49 years old and 18 years old at exactly the same time. And that is when I heard footsteps stop. There's a particular sound a busy corridor makes when one person in it suddenly stops moving. The river keeps flowing around the place where the stone dropped. I felt it before I understood it, a stillness opening up to my left, and I turned my head, and there was a man in an army service uniform standing about 10 feet away, and on his shoulders were 3 silver stars. He was a lieutenant general. He was perhaps in his late 50s, silver at the temples, with the kind of stillness that real authority has, the kind that does not need to announce itself. He was looking at me, not at the desk, not at the torn pass, at my face. And I watched something move across his features that I did not expect, which was not confusion and was not curiosity. It was recognition, and then right behind it, something that looked almost like horror. He crossed to the desk. He did not hurry exactly, but the space cleared for him the way space clears for 3 stars. And he reached out and took the 2 torn halves of my visitor pass off the counter, out from under Coyle's hand, and he held them for a second, looking at them, and then he looked back up at me. "Colonel Alcott," he said. The corridor, which had been a river, went quiet in a widening circle around us. I saw Coyle's face change. I saw the exact moment the word colonel reached him and rearranged everything. "General Okafor," I said because I knew him. It took me a breath, but I knew him. Samuel Okafor. In 2005, he had been a major, a liaison officer, 36 years old, and on the ground the day the compound came down. I had not seen him in nearly 20 years. He had been a captain's memory to me, a face in a very bad afternoon. And here he was, with 3 stars, holding the halves of a pass a security guard had just torn up in front of my mother. "I'm so sorry," he said. He said it quietly, but it carried, because everything carries when a room has gone silent to listen. "Colonel, I am so sorry. This should never have happened to you. Not to you, not to anyone, but God, not to you." He turned then, and he looked at Coyle, and he did not raise his voice either, which was somehow worse. "Do you know who this is?" he said. It was not really a question. "This is Colonel Miriam Alcott. She is a Medal of Honor recipient. Her portrait is being placed in the Hall of Heroes in this building in about 90 minutes, and you tore up her pass." I have thought a great deal since about what my brother's face did in that moment, because I was watching him and not the general. Russell had spent our entire lives narrating me to other people, shrinking me to a size that fit beside him, and he stood there in that corridor and watched a 3-star general apologize to me with something close to grief in his voice. And there was nothing he could say, because for the first time there was no version of the story small enough to make this fit. His mouth opened and then closed. My mother's hand had come up to cover her own mouth, and I, who had imagined for years what it would feel like to be believed, found that I felt no triumph at all. I felt only a strange, quiet correction, like a bone that had been set wrong for decades being, at last, gently put back into place. I bent down, I picked up the 2 halves of the pass myself from where they had fallen, and I held them in my hand. General Okafor waited. He did not rush me, and when I straightened up, he simply said, "Ma'am, may I walk you in?" and offered, not his arm, but his respect, and I said yes. We walked. The corridor started moving again behind us, but slower, the way people move when they know they have just seen something. General Okafor kept pace beside me, and for a little while he did not say anything, which I appreciated because I did not entirely trust my own voice yet. Then he spoke, not about the desk, but about 2005. He kept it short. He told me what it had looked like from where he had been, on the far side of that afternoon, and he told me a detail I had never known, which was the name of one of the 9, a young lance corporal, and what that young man had gone on to do with the life I had pulled out of the rubble. Married, 2 daughters, a high school baseball coach now, in Georgia. "He talks about you," Okafor said. "He doesn't know your rank or where you're stationed. He just tells people there was a captain who came back in when nobody would have blamed her for staying out. That's you. That's the story that's out there, Colonel, not the one that just happened at that desk." He told me one more thing before we reached the doors. He told me that after that afternoon in 2005, there had been a period where he had wondered whether he had done enough himself, whether he had been fast enough, brave enough, and that watching me go back into that compound had been the thing that set the bar for the rest of his career. "You've been a measuring stick for me for 20 years, Colonel," he said, "and you never even knew it. Most of the people who shape us never find out they did." He said he had made general, in part, by asking himself in hard rooms what I would have done. I did not know what to say to that. It is a disorienting thing to learn that while your own family was busy making you smaller, a stranger on the far side of the worst day of your life had quietly made you into the standard he measured himself against. 2 people looked at the exact same woman. One of them saw nothing worth a follow-up question at a dinner table. The other one built a career around her example. The difference between them was not me. The difference was entirely in what they were willing to see. I want to tell you I stayed composed, because composure is the thing I am known for, the thing I have built a life on. But I felt my eyes sting, and I let them, and I did not look away from him, because there is a kind of respect you owe a person who is handing you back your own history intact. To hear my life narrated by someone who had actually been there, after 30 years of hearing it, narrated by someone who had not, was a feeling I did not have a word for, and still don't. Before we reached the hall, a man in a suit intercepted us, half out of breath. He was Coyle's supervisor, and he was mortified, and he apologized in a rush of words and asked me whether I wanted to file a formal complaint, whether I wanted the officer removed from his post that morning. And I thought about it. I want to be honest that I thought about it because there is a version of me that has earned the right to be furious. And I would not blame her. But I have learned something over the years about what to do with a moment like that, and it is this. The satisfaction of ruining a small man is smaller than it looks. No, I told the supervisor. I don't want him fired standing there. I want him to understand what he did. Those are not the same thing, and the second one is harder, and it's the one that might actually matter. The supervisor blinked at me. I don't think it was the answer he expected. It was not, I will admit, the answer the 18-year-old in me wanted. But I was not 18. I was a colonel and a mother's daughter, and I had spent my whole life deciding who I was going to be in the moments that tempted me to be less. My mother caught up to us then. She had let go of Russell somewhere back there, and she came up beside me and she was shaking a little and she tried to speak. Miriam, she said. Miriam, I didn't. And then she couldn't finish it. She was 78 years old, and she had just watched, in the space of 5 minutes, her daughter be treated as garbage by a stranger and then honored by a general. And I think the whole architecture of what she had believed for 30 years was coming down around her, quietly, in a marble hallway. I put my hand over her hand. I was not ready yet to have that conversation, but I was not going to leave her standing there alone with it either. Later, Mom, I said gently. We'll talk, I promise. Later. And then the doors of the Hall of Heroes were in front of me, and I stopped. On the other side of those doors was a room where my own face waited under a cloth. And it occurred to me, standing there, that I had spent a great deal of my life reflecting on every dinner where I had stayed quiet, and that my silence, all those years, had not been neutral. It had been a kind of permission. Every time I let the false story stand, I had helped write it. That was a hard thing to understand about myself, standing outside that door. But it was true, and I have found that the true things are usually the ones worth standing still for. Inside, there was a small program before the unveiling, and there was a room set aside where I changed into my dress blues. When I came back out, the medal at my throat, the pale blue ribbon that most people have never seen up close, I saw my mother see me. Really see me. She had been at the ceremony in 2007, but that had been nearly 20 years ago, and she had spent every one of those years since then folding the memory into something smaller. Now here it was again, in front of her, unfoldable. Her daughter in the uniform of a Marine Corps colonel with the highest decoration this country gives resting at the base of her throat. She started to cry, quietly, the way she does everything, and for once she did not look to Russell to tell her how to feel. There is a decision that lives inside a room like that, and I made it while the citation was being read. The citation is short. It is always short. It names the year and the place, and it describes, in the flat language the military uses, for the things it cannot afford to be sentimental about, what a person did. When they read the number, 9, when they read that there were 9 Marines who came home because of the actions of the officer whose portrait was about to be unveiled, I heard the room go still, and I made my decision. I was done managing my brother's comfort. I was done shrinking so that he could stay the tall one. Whatever happened next, I was going to let the truth stand exactly as tall as it actually was. The cloth came off the portrait. It is a strange thing to see your own face on a wall like that. Painted, permanent, hung among people whose stories you had read as a young Marine and could not believe you were now beside. I did not feel pride, exactly. I felt something quieter and heavier, a sense of the 9 and of the ones who did not come home, and of the long, strange road from a laughing brother in a kitchen in Dayton to this wall. Afterward, there was a reception, and Russell found me. I knew he would. He came up with a plate he wasn't eating from, and a smile that was working too hard, and he did the thing he has always done. He reached for a reframe. I have to tell you, he said. I always knew you were doing something big over there. I used to tell people, my sister, she doesn't talk about it, but it's serious. I always knew. And he looked at me, and I understood that he was offering me the old arrangement, the one where I nod and accept his version and we all keep the peace, and where he gets to have always known. For the first time in my life, standing there in my dress blues, I did not take it. You don't have to rewrite it, Russell, I said. I said it kindly. I want you to know I said it kindly because I did not do this to hurt him. You didn't know. For 30 years you didn't know. And worse than that, you didn't want to. And that's okay. But you don't have to build a new story now where you always did. You just have to let this one be true. I nodded toward the wall, toward my own painted face. That's all. You just have to let it be true. He didn't have an answer. I have known my brother for 53 years, and I have almost never seen him without an answer. But he stood there with his plate, and around us the room was full of people who already knew exactly who I was. Officers who had come specifically to honor me, strangers who had read the citation, and there was no audience for his version anymore. The social currency he had traded on his whole life, the easy story, the certain shrug, was simply not accepted in that room, and he felt it. I watched him feel it, standing alone in a crowd with a plate of food he wasn't going to eat. And I did not enjoy it, but I did not rescue him from it either. There's a difference between those two things, and learning it has been most of my adult life. The weeks after were quieter than you might think. Nothing detonates. That is the part the stories never tell you. When a lie that has organized a family for 30 years finally breaks, there is no explosion. There is just a slow, rearranging, awkward, and ordinary, as everyone figures out how to stand now that the old furniture is gone. Russell called me about 10 days later. I could hear it in his voice before he said anything, that he was off balance, reaching for a footing that wasn't there. He tried at first to slip back into the old dynamic, made a joke at my expense, a small one, reflexive, the kind he had made 10,000 times, and I did not laugh the way I used to. I did not get angry either. I just let the joke land in silence, and then I answered the actual question underneath his call, which was whether we were all right. "We can be all right, Russell," I said. "But not the old way. The old way is over." He didn't know what to do with that. He had never had to talk to me as an equal. For 53 years, I had been the smaller planet in his sky, and now the gravity had changed and he kept reaching for handholds that had come off in his hands. My mother called separately, and her call was different. She did not want to reframe anything. She wanted, for the first time in her life, to actually know. "Tell me what happened," she said. "In 2005, the real thing, not the short version you give at dinner, unless I'm your mother, and I've never once asked you, and I should have." And so I told her. I sat on my back step with the phone against my ear, and I told my 78-year-old mother the thing I had spent 20 years keeping short. And she listened to all of it, and she cried. And at the end she said, "I went along with him. All those years, I let him make you small because it was easier, and you were the strong one, so I told myself you didn't mind. That was wrong of me. I'm so sorry, Miriam." To be met like that, at 49, by the person whose peacekeeping had cost you the most, is a complicated gift. It does not erase the years, but it changes what the years mean going forward, and that is not nothing. That is, in fact, a great deal. I told Priya about all of it, of course. She listened the way she always does, and at the end she was quiet for a second, and then she said, "You sound different." I asked her what she meant. "You sound," she said, "like someone who finally stopped apologizing for existing." I laughed, but she wasn't joking, and she was right. Something in the pitch of my own voice had changed. I had spent so long being careful, being small enough to fit, managing the comfort of people who never once managed mine, that I had not noticed the effort it took until it stopped. There was a harder conversation with my mother, too, later that same month, that I have not told many people about. She called one evening and she was quiet for a while before she got to it, and then she asked me whether I had ever forgiven her in all those years for not standing up for me, and I told her the truth, which was that forgiveness had not been the right word for a long time, because forgiveness implies a single event, and what had happened between us was not an event. It was a climate. It was 30 years of weather. You do not forgive weather. You just learn to live somewhere else, or you wait for the season to turn. "The season's turning, Mom," I told her. "That's what this is. I'm not holding a grudge. I'm just glad it's turning while we're both still here to feel it." She was quiet again, and then she said, "Your father saw it, you know. At the end. He told me once, near the end, that he thought we'd gotten you wrong, that you were the strongest of all of us and we'd treated you like the spare. I had not known that. I sat with the phone, and I let that land, my father, who had said "good girl" absently and reached for his keys, having understood at the very end the thing that took the rest of them another 20 years. It did not fix the past, but it put a small, warm light back in a room I had long ago decided was dark, and I was grateful for it. Russell, meanwhile, was learning something the hard way, which was how much of his own standing had been borrowed. There was a family gathering that summer that I did not attend, not out of spite. I simply had duties, and I heard about it afterward from a cousin. Apparently, the whole room kept asking about me, about the Pentagon, about the medal, about the portrait. And Russell, who had spent 30 years being the one people asked about, spent the afternoon fielding questions about the sister he had spent 30 years diminishing. My cousin told me Russell was gracious about it, which surprised me, and also that he looked, by the end, like a man realizing that a good deal of his light had always been reflected off someone he had refused to look at directly. I did not feel vindicated hearing this. I felt mostly sad for the years, his and mine both, and a small, stubborn hope that a person could still change at 53. He did, a little. Change at that age does not come as a transformation. It comes as a series of small, effortful choices, and you only see it if you are paying attention. The first one I saw came in the early fall. Russell drove out to see me on neutral ground, a diner halfway between his place and mine. And he did not come to reframe anything. He came to ask. He sat across from me in a vinyl booth, and he asked me real questions about my life, my actual life, the deployments and the command and what it had cost and what it had given me. And then, and this is the part I did not expect, he listened to the answers. He did not narrate. He did not shrink anything. He just listened, and at the end he said, "I'm sorry, Miriam. No qualifier. I'm not going to say I was busy or I didn't understand. I'm just sorry. I had a sister who did one of the bravest things a person can do, and I spent my whole life making sure nobody at the table would find out because I couldn't stand not being the impressive one. That's the truth. I'm sorry. It is a strange thing to be seen by someone who spent decades looking past you. I did not fall into his arms. That is not who I am, and it is not what the moment called for. I set my terms plainly and without cruelty, because I have learned that kindness without a spine is just another way of disappearing. I don't need you to admire me, I told him. I spent a long time thinking I did, and I don't. What I need is for you to stop editing me. That's the whole thing, Russell. Just stop editing me. You don't have to make me bigger. You just have to stop making me smaller. He nodded. He understood. And the door, which I had held shut for good reason for a long time, I let open. Not all the way, but enough. Repair is not a moment. I know that now. It is a practice. A thing you choose again and again. And I decided I was willing to keep choosing it as long as he kept showing up honest. There was a moment in that diner I keep coming back to. After he apologized, there was a silence, and then Russell did something I had never once seen him do in 53 years. He asked me to teach him something. He said that his son, my nephew, the one who had asked me what I did all those years ago and been given the wrong answer, was thinking about enlisting, and that he did not know how to talk to the boy about it because he had spent his whole life pretending to understand a world he had actually kept himself deliberately ignorant of. I don't know what any of it means, he admitted. The ranks, the branches, what's hard, what matters. I made fun of it for 30 years, so I'd never have to admit I didn't understand it. And now my kid wants in, and I've got nothing to give him. And so, in a vinyl booth over cold coffee, I taught my older brother the things he had spent 3 decades refusing to learn. And he took out his phone and made notes, actual notes like a student. It was one of the more surreal afternoons of my life. It was also, I think, the first honest hour the two of us had ever spent together. Sometimes the door back to a person runs straight through the thing they were most ashamed not to know. My mother and I grew genuinely close in a way we never had been. I would call her on Sunday afternoons, and we would talk for an hour, real talk, and she began to ask me about the work with actual curiosity. And she began, here and there, to correct people herself. I overheard her once, on the phone with a friend, describing what her daughter did, and she got it right, all of it, with a pride in her voice that she was no longer routing through my brother first. I stood in the next room, and I did not let her know I had heard, and I held on to that sound for a long time. By the time the leaves were down, my life looked different, though very little in it had actually changed. My post was the same. My duties were the same. The work I had always loved was still the work. What had changed was the weight I had been carrying without naming it, the constant low labor of translating myself for people who refused to read me in the original. That labor was gone, and its absence was so light it took me weeks to trust it. I did a lot of thinking that autumn about how much of a life can be spent on the wrong audience. I ran the arithmetic once, half seriously, sitting on my back step. 30 years of holidays, call it 100 dinners, 100 careful evenings where I had spent the whole meal managing the temperature of a room so that my brother could stay comfortable and my mother could stay calm. 100 dinners where I had swallowed the correction, changed the subject for them, made myself smaller so the picture would hold. And I thought about all the energy that had gone into that, thousands of hours of quiet labor, and I thought about what it might have built if I had spent it on people who actually looked at me. It was not a bitter thought. I was past bitter. It was more like the feeling you get cleaning out a garage and finding a tool you had been buying replacements for all along, because you forgot you already owned it. I had owned my own worth the entire time. I had just kept it in a box in the basement, next to the flashlight, waiting for permission from people who were never going to give it. The permission, it turned out, was mine to give. It always had been. Nobody tells you that. You have to find it out yourself, usually late, usually the hard way. There was a morning, back at my post, when a young Marine, a lance corporal barely out of her teens, worked up the nerve to ask me about the medal. She had seen the ribbon. She asked the way young Marines ask, direct and a little terrified. And I told her, plainly, without shrinking it and without inflating it, the way I had never once been able to tell it at my mother's table. I told her about the 9 and about the ones who didn't come home, and about the fact that courage is not the absence of fear, but a decision you make while afraid. She listened with her whole face, and I realized, watching her, that I could finally tell the true version out loud, and that the person who had made that possible was not the general and was not my brother. It was me on a marble floor, bending down to pick up the 2 halves of a torn pass and deciding, at last, that I did not have to disappear to keep the peace. General Okafor and I stayed in touch. He connected me that fall with a mentorship program for young officers and asked me to speak to them, to tell the true version to the people who most needed to hear that it was survivable. All of it, the fear and the aftermath and the long, strange business of a life. The battlefield witness became a professional ally, and there was a rightness to that the man who had handed me back my own history in a hallway was now helping me hand it forward. My mother's age was beginning to show that autumn, small things, a slowness, a forgetfulness here and there, nothing alarming yet, but enough to remind me that the reconciliation we had built had not come a moment too soon. I was grateful, in a way that ached, that the truth had arrived while she was still here to hold it. So many people never get that. So many people carry the false story of themselves all the way to a graveside. I had gotten mine set right with my mother still alive to see it, and I did not take a single Sunday phone call for granted after that. I kept the torn visitor pass. I know that might sound strange. I taped the 2 halves back together, and I put it in the frame on my wall, next to a copy of the citation, and people who see it assume it must be sentimental. Some memento of a happy day. It isn't. I keep it because it is the truest object I own. It is the exact size of the gap between what people decide you are at a glance and what you have actually done with your life. Every morning I walk past it on my way out the door, and it reminds me of something I never want to forget, which is that the world is full of people ready to tear your pass in half over a misspelled name, and that not one of them gets to decide what you are. The desk does not decide it. The family does not decide it. You decide it by the work on the days nobody is watching. A man looked at me for 2 seconds and tore up my right to be in the room, and 90 minutes later, my face went up on a wall in that same building, permanently, among heroes. Both of those things happened in the same corridor on the same morning, and the past is the proof that the first one never gets to be the last word unless you let it. There was a dinner over the holidays, back in the same dining room in Dayton where all of this had started, that I want to leave you with. Same table, same china my mother only uses twice a year. But everything about the room had changed because the people in it finally had. My nephew was home, and he asked me, in front of everyone, to tell the story of the medal, the real one, and this time nobody stood up to carve anything. This time my brother sat still and listened to his son ask his sister the question he had spent 30 years answering wrong. and he let me answer it right. And when I finished, Russell said to the whole table, "Your aunt is the bravest person I have ever known, and I spent most of my life too small to say so." He said it plainly, no performance in it, and my mother reached over and put her hand on mine, and I sat at the table I had disappeared from 100 times, and I did not disappear. I was all the way there, in my own family, in my own name, at last. So let me say this to you, whoever you are, watching this. If you have been underestimated by the people who should know you best, by a brother, a parent, a whole family that hardened around a story of you that was never true, I want you to hear the part that took me 49 years to learn. You do not have to shout to set the record straight. You do not have to ruin the small man at the desk. You do not even have to make them admire you. You just have to stop helping them edit you. Stop disappearing to keep a peace that was only ever peaceful for them. Let the truth stand exactly as tall as it is, and let the people who refuse to look at it stand in its shadow if that is what they choose. The recognition was never the point. I want to be clear about that at the end, because it is the thing I most want you to take with you. The portrait is on the wall, and I am glad my mother saw it, and I am glad my brother finally learned to say my name without shrinking it. But the medal at my throat was never the thing that mattered. The 9 were the thing that mattered. The Lance Corporal in Georgia coaching high school baseball, with 2 daughters who exist because a captain went back in, that was the thing that mattered. The work was always enough. It was enough on the days no one clapped, and it was enough on the day a general apologized in a hallway. And it is enough now. It was always, all along, more than enough. And so it turns out, was I. If you've ever watched a family harden around a version of you that was never true and had to decide whether to keep the peace or finally let the truth stand, I would love to hear from you. Would you have let that guard fire himself on the spot, or would you have done what I did and asked for something harder? Do you think my brother really changed, or do people only ever manage it halfway? And have you ever kept some small, broken thing as a reminder of the day the record got set straight? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hit home, hit that subscribe button and the bell.